When I first met Captain Sobel, yeah, that's the guy's actual nickname in the office, he seemed like the kind of guy you'd want on your team. I remember him from the early days as this sharp financial analyst, real by-the-books kind of person. A bit reserved, maybe a little stiff, but undeniably respected. People trusted his judgment because he always came prepared, knew the legal nuances inside out, and kept everything running smoothly behind the scenes. Honestly, it seemed like he was building a promising career, right? The kind where hard work actually got rewarded. Then, out of the blue, he got promoted to lead our entire department. It was a big deal, a step up that most of us thought he earned. Maybe we were all a bit too eager to celebrate, because that's when things started going downhill. I mean, not the usual office stress or petty politics kind of downhill, but a total transformation you couldn't ignore. It was like Sobel swapped out the quiet professionalism for this bombastic, power-tripping boss we never signed up for. Looking back, I think insecurity was eating at him more than we realized. From what I pieced together, the promotion rattled his ego in ways he hadn't expected. Instead of growing into the role, he doubled down on being intimidating. Suddenly, the guy who'd been calm and rational was yelling in meetings, snapping at people over trivial mistakes, and making snide remarks that felt less like jokes and more like outright insults. It wasn't subtle either. He made a point of belittling the minorities and women on the team. Racist comments slipped out during casual conversations, and the misogyny was unmistakable, creeping into his critiques, his smirks, even the way he dismissed ideas from female colleagues. I remember one moment pretty clearly. There was this team meeting where an associate, who was a woman of color, suggested a different approach to a project. Sobel practically rolled his eyes and said something along the lines of, "Maybe let the grown-ups handle this." The room went silent, and I caught the shock on everyone's faces. But nobody said a word. And honestly, I didn't want to either because it felt like you'd be next if you spoke up. What made it worse was his boss, this guy we nicknamed used car salesman, not because he sold cars, but because he had this greasy charm and a knack for talking his way out of uncomfortable situations. This salesman was supposed to be the higher-up who kept things in check, but instead, he just shrugged off every complaint about Sobel. One time, a group of us tried reporting the abuse. We gathered emails, documented incidents. We thought that would have an impact. But salesmen dismissed it as office drama, saying things like, "People just need to toughen up if they want to survive here. No consequences, no intervention." Sobel just kept growing bolder. First, I thought maybe this was a phase. Maybe Sobel would snap out of it if someone called him out directly. But no, the man seemed to thrive on making people feel small, feeding his ego by asserting dominance through fear and prejudice. The atmosphere shifted so much that it started to feel toxic physically. You could see it in the way people walked into the department, hunched over, checking over their shoulders, shutting down any spark of enthusiasm before it even had a chance to surface. Meeting rooms filled with tension, whispers replacing the open conversations we used to have. The kind of place where the minute you dropped a pen or hesitated, Sobel would pounce on it like a wolf smelling weakness. I won't lie, it was exhausting. I felt trapped between wanting to protect my own sanity and the responsibility towards my colleagues, many of whom were bearing the brunt of this abusive behavior. And while we were trying to keep our heads down, hoping this would pass, Sobel's outbursts only escalated. There was no more pretending it was just stress or pressure. His rants became more frequent and nastier, targeting anyone who didn't fit his narrow idea of worthy. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just a toxic boss with a bad temper. This was a tyrant in the making, and without anyone willing to stop him, the kingdom he ruled was going to get a lot darker before it got better. The tipping point was coming. The question was, who would stand up and take him down? I remember the moment things really started to spiral out of control under Sobel's reign. At first, it was just little things, snide remarks, offhand dismissals. But soon it became brutal and impossible to ignore. Women and minorities in our team, once full of pride and energy, began showing up drained, anxious, each day like walking into a storm. One incident still haunts me. My friend Alia, a smart, dedicated project coordinator whom I admired, was called into Sobel's office over what should have been a routine scheduling change that she calmly explained. Instead of a discussion, Sobel slammed his fist on the table and launched into a tirade. He accused her of sabotaging the whole project, questioned her loyalty, and worst of all, unleashed a string of insults laced with venomous stereotypes targeting her background and gender. I was just outside the door when I heard her begging him to stop trying to reason, but Sobel just kept shouting. It wasn't just about work anymore, it was deeply personal hatred. The humiliation was public too. A few coworkers lingered nearby, watching, some frozen, some too afraid to intervene. And this wasn't a one-off. Another colleague, Jamal, who had the patience of a saint, was publicly berated for simply asking for clarification on a task. Sobel accused him of not being fit for this position, implying racial slurs that sent a chilling message to everyone else. These moments chipped away at all of us, painting a picture that accountability didn't exist here, especially not for Sobel. What made it worse, much worse, was the deafening silence from those who should have stood up. We filed complaints, detailed testimonies, even collected emails and recordings where Sobel's abuse was evident. But every time, the complaints were dismissed or buried. His boss, Mr. Hendricks, seemed blind, or maybe willingly ignorant. Rumors swirled that they were close, that Sobel's behavior was overlooked because of nepotism or fear. It was maddening. One day I saw an email where Hendricks casually joked about Sobel being gruff but effective, completely ignoring the wave of distress underneath. The breaking point came when Alia was accused, without a shred of proof, of falsifying company documents. A criminal accusation that could destroy her career and reputation. The accusations were obviously fabricated, a clear attempt to intimidate and push her out. Sobel held a meeting that turned into a courtroom spectacle where Alia had no chance to defend herself. She was crying, utterly broken. The HR department did nothing to shield her. It felt like they were complicit or too scared to challenge Sobel's narrative. Eventually, pushing her to the edge both emotionally and professionally, Alia had no choice but to resign. She left the kingdom of Nod not because she failed, but because the environment was hostile beyond repair. Watching her walk away defeated, I realized this wasn't just individual cruelty. It was systemic failure on a grand scale. The injustice was suffocating. It felt like shouting into a void, like the organization actively chose to protect the abuser rather than the abused. But at that moment, something shifted inside me and the others who had witnessed this horror unfold. We couldn't stand by anymore. The cost was too high. It was clear that if we wanted any chance of justice, we'd have to become our own voice. We'd have to gather every bit of evidence, find each witness willing to speak up, and confront the management that had so far betrayed us all. That's when the fight really began. Looking back, that moment when we decided to finally push back against Sobel felt like walking blindfolded into a lion's den. For so long it was just this heavy, silent weight crushing all of us. The women on the team, the folks who had cowered under his sneering glare or shrugged off the racist, sexist crap he spat out like it was just routine office banter. But enough was enough. We couldn't keep pretending it wasn't happening, or that it was just how things were. So a few of us, mostly women who had endured his verbal abuse, his crude jokes, the way he'd openly dismiss our work or make unfair comments about our appearances, started gathering stories. I remember sitting in cramped rooms with trembling voices, sometimes tears, as each person recounted what Sobel had done to them. They weren't just isolated incidents either. These stories formed a pattern so ugly, so poisonous, it was impossible to ignore. From unwanted advances to outright intimidation, from subtle undermining to outright racial slurs, the list was endless. We scribbled names, wrote down dates, saved embarrassing emails and text messages, all to build a case no one could sweep under the rug. We thought naively, maybe that presenting this mountain of evidence to leadership would finally change things. We chose Used Car, the higher-up who presumably oversaw Sobel, thinking he'd want to clean house. But man, that meeting was surreal. We laid everything out. Every testimony, every hateful word Sobel had thrown around, every instance of harassment. And Used Car? He sat there, barely batting an eye, and then started deflecting. "We can't move people around just because of a few complaints," he said. "Besides, Sobel's been a tough guy to keep on the team. Maybe we just need to be patient, work on the culture." It was like he was reading off a script designed to protect the status quo. He thanked us for bringing it forward but made it clear that nothing really had to change. It wasn't just blindness, it felt like complicity. Used Car's refusal to act was a green light for Sobel to keep pushing boundaries. For a brief moment they repositioned Sobel, which was just a fancy way of putting him somewhere else superficially, while he kept pulling the same crap behind the scenes. The harassment didn't stop. In some ways it got worse because now the message was clear. The suits didn't really care. That's when the utter exhaustion hit me and the others. We realized this wasn't just about one bad manager anymore. It was the whole institution protecting itself. It felt like we were trapped in the kingdom of Nod, cursed with a tyrant's shadow looming over all of us, while those supposed to rule just winked and looked the other way. But somewhere in the depths of that frustration, a spark ignited. We knew we couldn't fight alone. If the old regime refused to have our backs, then we'd have to find new allies, build a coalition strong enough to expose Sobel for the tyrant he was once and for all. And then, just when we were beginning to lose hope, news came that the old guard was being replaced. New faces were coming in, faces who might actually listen. That fresh start was a chance we couldn't waste. It was time to step out of the shadows and prepare for the fight that could finally bring justice to the kingdom of Nod. It's funny how sometimes all it takes is a change at the top to start turning things around. When used car salesmen retired, none of us really knew what to expect. Honestly, a part of me didn't even think it mattered. I'd been through too much under Sobel's rule to imagine anything could change. But then the new legal chief came in, and she was different. Sharp, no nonsense, and the kind of person who didn't just listen, she actually heard you. I remember the moment things started shifting. A small group of us managed to get an appointment with her. We came armed, not with vague complaints or rumors, but with detailed documentation. Emails, voice recordings, dates, times, names. Days and nights of brutal notes we had painstakingly kept, all laid out in front of her. It felt like handing over a map to a hidden treasure. Except the treasure was justice, and the map was proof. From there the wheels really started grinding. The legal office launched inspections. There were interviews, some formal, some informal, with more and more people willing to talk. Over 30 victims stepped forward, each story adding another thread to this tangled web of misconduct. And it wasn't just the women or minorities. Even some guys who had suffered under Sobel's reign came forward. It was wild to see how many were quietly suffering but fed up enough to speak up when they finally saw the chance. During those interviews, I heard stories that broke my heart all over again, but also stories of quiet heroism. People standing their ground, refusing to be bullied anymore. It was like watching that grim cloud we'd been under start to crack and let some light in. The investigation didn't stop there. Sobel was called in for a prolonged interrogation in Washington, D.C. I don't want to sugarcoat it, those days were intense. No one knew exactly what to expect, and the office was tense, holding its breath for news. The stories, the evidence, the testimonies, they all painted a picture that couldn't be ignored. And then came word about a pending demotion. It wasn't just a slap on the wrist. It was the first real sign that the system was willing to hold Sobel accountable. But what really got us was when Sobel just vanished. No resignation, no formal goodbye, just gone. Rumors swirled that he'd disappeared to avoid the fallout, and honestly, the silence was oddly satisfying. The tyranny had evaporated like a bad nightmare. Looking back, that whole period was a roller coaster, painful, exhausting, but ultimately hopeful. It showed me that when people come together, even the deepest wounds in a toxic place can start healing. What started as a whisper among the oppressed became a roar demanding justice. And in the face of that roar, even the most brutal tyrant can fall. But as much as that victory mattered, it wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The story of how we rebuilt, how we kept the fight going, that's something worth telling next. Because if there's one thing I learned, it's that solidarity and persistence are the real powerhouses against workplace tyranny.